I'm standing in a lawyer's office in downtown Chicago, watching my stepmother Patricia's face drain of all color as the words sole beneficiary echo through the mahogany-paneled room. The manila envelope in my trembling hands contains everything: the house, the business, the investments, even the vintage Mustang that Richard always said would never be mine because real sons earn their inheritance. For 15 years, he reminded me daily that I wasn't his blood, that I was just the baggage that came with marrying my mother. Now, 3 weeks after his funeral, I'm learning that everything I thought I knew about my family was a carefully constructed lie. The irony isn't lost on me. The man who spent my entire childhood telling me I'd never measure up to his standards just made me a millionaire while leaving his precious biological daughter with nothing but a trust fund she can't touch until she's 35. Patricia's perfectly manicured nails are digging into the leather chair arms as she processes what just happened, and I can practically hear her mentally calculating how much of her money just slipped through her fingers. My name is Emma, and until 20 minutes ago, I thought I understood my place in this family. I was the unwanted stepdaughter who never quite fit in, the reminder of my mother's first marriage that ended in abandonment and heartbreak. Richard Martinez had swooped in when I was 7, promising my mother Sarah a stable life and me a father figure who would treat me as his own. What he delivered instead was a masterclass in emotional manipulation disguised as tough love. Every family dinner became an opportunity for him to compare me unfavorably to his daughter Jessica. Every school achievement was met with lukewarm acknowledgement, followed by stories about how Jessica had done the same thing but better. When I graduated valedictorian from high school, he told me it was because I went to an easier school than Jessica's prestigious private academy. When I got into Northwestern on a full academic scholarship, he reminded me that Jessica's acceptance to Harvard was more impressive because she didn't need financial aid. The message was always crystal clear. I was temporary, tolerated, but never truly family. Looking back now, I can see how methodically he conditioned me to expect nothing while simultaneously building an empire that would eventually become mine. Richard owned 3 successful auto repair shops across the Chicago suburbs, each one a monument to his immigrant parents' American dream realized through their son's determination and business acumen. He'd started with a single garage in Cicero, working 16-hour days and sleeping on a cot in the back office until he could afford his first apartment. By the time he married my mother, he'd expanded to 2 locations and was eyeing a third in Schaumburg that would cater to the wealthy suburbanites with their luxury imports and expensive maintenance schedules. I remember him taking me to the shops on Saturdays, showing me how to read invoices and explaining the difference between genuine parts and aftermarket alternatives. At the time, I thought it was just killing time while my mother and Jessica went shopping, but now I realize he was training me, preparing me for something I never saw coming. The seeds of this moment were planted during those Saturday afternoons when Richard would quiz me about business principles while we waited for customers to pick up their vehicles. He'd ask me to calculate profit margins on different jobs, explain why customer service was more important than being the cheapest option, and describe how building trust led to repeat business and referrals. I absorbed it all eagerly, grateful for any attention from the man I desperately wanted to see me as worthy of his love. Meanwhile, Jessica would be at the country club taking tennis lessons or shopping with friends, completely uninterested in the family business that funded her privileged lifestyle. When I'd ask if she might want to visit the shop sometime, Richard would wave off the suggestion, saying she was too refined for the smell of motor oil and the sound of air wrenches. I internalized that message too. If Jessica was too refined for the business, then my interest in it must be evidence of my lower class, my fundamental unsuitability for their world. The dynamic reached its peak during my senior year of high school when I announced my intention to major in business administration with a focus on operations management. I'd spent months researching programs, crafting essays about my career goals, and preparing for interviews with the confidence that comes from having a clear vision of your future. Richard's response was swift and devastating. "Don't get your hopes up about working in the family business, Emma. This is something I'm building for my real children, for the Martinez legacy. You'll need to find your own path because this one isn't meant for you." The words hit me like a physical blow, made worse by the fact that he delivered them during Sunday dinner while my mother pretended not to hear and Jessica smirked into her mashed potatoes. That night, I rewrote my college essays, removing every reference to family business and replacing them with vague statements about pursuing opportunities in corporate America. I told myself I was being realistic, protecting myself from further disappointment, but really I was learning to shrink my dreams to fit the space I'd been assigned in Richard's world. What I couldn't have known then was that Richard had been watching me more carefully than I ever imagined, testing my character in ways that would only make sense years later. Every time he dismissed my achievements, he'd privately document them in a leather-bound journal that his lawyer would eventually use to justify the inheritance decision. Every time I helped a customer at the shop without being asked, every time I stayed late to help with inventory, every time I suggested a process improvement that saved money or increased efficiency. It was all being recorded by a man who was apparently keeping score in a game I didn't even know we were playing. While I was learning to expect nothing, he was building a case for why I deserved everything. The cruelest irony is that his constant rejection of me was actually a 16-year job interview that I passed with flying colors, even as I thought I was failing at every turn. College became my escape from the suffocating dynamics at home, but even Northwestern's beautiful Evanston campus couldn't completely shield me from Richard's psychological warfare. He'd call during my freshman year finals week to remind me that my tuition was a burden on the family budget and that I should consider transferring to a state school to save money. When I made Dean's List 3 semesters in a row, he'd mention it briefly at family gatherings before immediately pivoting to Jessica's latest accomplishment at Harvard. Usually something like joining the right sorority or dating someone from a prominent Boston family. The message was always the same. My academic success was expected and unremarkable, while Jessica's social achievements were proof of her superior breeding and natural advantages. I learned to celebrate my victories in private, sharing good news with my roommate Sarah or my economics professor Dr. Williams, anyone who might actually be proud of what I was accomplishing instead of using it as a springboard to praise someone else. The pattern intensified during my sophomore year when I landed a coveted internship at a boutique consulting firm in downtown Chicago. The position was highly competitive, requiring 3 rounds of interviews and a presentation to the senior partners about process optimization strategies. I was one of only 6 students selected from hundreds of applicants, and the experience taught me more about business operations in 3 months than most people learn in years. I thought Richard might finally be impressed, might see that I was serious about building a career and contributing something meaningful to the world. Instead, he spent Thanksgiving dinner explaining to our extended family how Jessica's unpaid internship at a museum in Cambridge was more prestigious because it was cultural rather than commercial. When my cousin asked about my internship, Richard dismissed it as just data entry work and changed the subject to Jessica's latest art history paper. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 20 minutes, wondering why I kept hoping for recognition from someone who seemed constitutionally incapable of giving it. The breaking point came during my junior year when I suggested that Richard consider implementing a customer relationship management system across all 3 shop locations. I'd been studying CRM systems in my operations management course and could see how tracking customer service histories, maintenance schedules, and communication preferences could dramatically improve efficiency and customer satisfaction. I'd even researched specific software options, calculated implementation costs, and projected return on investment timelines. I presented the whole proposal during a family dinner, complete with printed charts and graphs, thinking this might be the moment when Richard finally saw me as someone with valuable business insights. He listened politely, asked a few clarifying questions, and then said, "That's very interesting, Emma, but these are complicated business decisions that require years of industry experience to understand properly. Maybe focus on your schoolwork and let the adults handle the business strategy." Jessica actually laughed out loud and said something about me trying to play businesswoman when I should be concentrating on finding a husband before I graduated. What made that rejection particularly devastating was that I knew the proposal was solid. I'd run it past Dr. Williams, who'd been impressed enough to suggest I submit a modified version for the university's annual business innovation competition. When I told my family I'd won third place and a $1,000 prize, Richard's response was to remind me that real business success couldn't be won in academic competitions. It required decades of practical experience and relationships that couldn't be learned from textbooks. He suggested I use the prize money to buy myself something nice, maybe a dress for job interviews, since I'd need to start thinking seriously about finding employment after graduation. The subtext was clear: don't get above yourself, don't mistake temporary academic success for real-world competence, and definitely don't imagine that anything you've learned qualifies you to have opinions about family business decisions. By senior year, I'd internalized Richard's message so completely that I barely mentioned my achievements at home anymore. When I was recruited by 3 different consulting firms before graduation, I told my family only that I'd found a job and would be staying in Chicago. When I received the Outstanding Graduate Award in my major, I didn't even mention it. When my operations management professor offered to write recommendations for MBA programs and suggested I consider applying to Kellogg or Booth, I thanked him but said I needed to focus on paying off student loans before thinking about graduate school. The truth was that I'd stopped believing I was capable of the kind of success that deserved recognition or investment. Richard had convinced me that my accomplishments were flukes, that real success required something I fundamentally lacked: the right breeding, the right connections, the right last name. I was Emma the stepdaughter, grateful for whatever scraps of approval I could gather, careful never to reach too high or want too much. The 4 years after college passed in a blur of 60-hour work weeks and careful emotional management. I threw myself into my consulting job, specializing in operations optimization for small and medium-sized businesses. The work was exactly what I dreamed of, helping family-owned companies streamline their processes, reduce waste, and increase profitability through better systems and employee training. I was good at it, really good, but I kept that success compartmentalized from my family life, just as I'd learned to do in college. When clients would praise my insights or refer me to other business owners, I'd feel a brief surge of pride followed immediately by Richard's voice in my head, reminding me not to get too comfortable with praise I probably didn't deserve. Family dinners became exercises in deflection. When asked about work, I'd give vague answers and quickly redirect conversation to safer topics like Jessica's new apartment in Lincoln Park or Richard's latest business expansion plans. Everything changed the weekend of my 26th birthday when Richard collapsed during Jessica's engagement party. We were at the country club, celebrating her upcoming wedding to Bradley Hutchinson, a pediatric surgeon whose family owned half of Lake Forest. I was standing by the bar, nursing a glass of wine and listening to Patricia describe the elaborate wedding they were planning in Napa Valley, when I heard someone scream from across the room. Richard was on the floor, clutching his chest, his face gray and contorted with pain. The next few hours blurred together: paramedics, sirens, the sterile smell of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and doctors using words like massive coronary event and extensive damage to the left ventricle. Jessica was hysterical, Patricia was making frantic phone calls to relatives, and my mother sat in stunned silence, aging 10 years in the span of 10 minutes. I found myself taking charge, asking the right questions, filling out paperwork, and coordinating with insurance companies because someone had to function, and I was apparently the only one capable of thinking clearly in crisis. During the 3 weeks Richard spent in the cardiac ICU, I essentially ran his life. I contacted his business partners, managed payroll for all 3 shops, handled customer complaints, and made sure the bills got paid on time. Patricia was too distraught to deal with practical matters. Jessica was planning a wedding and couldn't be expected to interrupt her preparations for something as mundane as business operations. And my mother was splitting her time between the hospital and caring for Patricia's emotional needs. The shop managers knew me from all those childhood Saturdays, and they accepted my temporary authority without question. I used everything I'd learned in consulting to streamline their daily operations, implement better inventory tracking, and improve customer communication systems. For 3 weeks, I got a taste of what it felt like to be truly essential, to have my decisions matter and my judgment trusted. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. When Richard finally came home, weak but recovering, I expected him to acknowledge what I'd done, maybe even thank me for keeping his business running while he fought for his life. Instead, he called a family meeting to discuss getting things back to normal and announced that he'd hired a professional management company to oversee daily operations. He thanked me briefly for helping out during the emergency, but made it clear that my temporary role was exactly that, temporary. When I tried to explain some of the improvements I'd implemented and how they were already showing positive results, he cut me off with a wave of his hand. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Emma, but this is a family business and family means blood. You did what you had to do, and I'm grateful, but let's not pretend this changes anything fundamental about your position in this family. The words hit me like a slap, made worse by Jessica's visible relief that I wouldn't be continuing to interfere with family business operations. That meeting was the moment I finally understood that no amount of competence, dedication, or loyalty would ever be enough to earn Richard's respect or acceptance. I could run his business better than anyone else in the family. I could save him thousands of dollars in inefficiencies. I could demonstrate value and commitment until I was blue in the face, but I would always be the outsider who was tolerated rather than embraced. Something hardened in me that day, a protective shell that I'd been building for years finally solidifying into something unbreachable. I smiled politely, congratulated him on his recovery, and quietly began making plans to protect myself from future disappointment. If I was going to be treated as an outsider, then I would act like one, polite but distant, helpful when asked but never volunteering, present but not invested. The next 18 months passed in a strange détente where I maintained cordial relationships with everyone while slowly emotionally disengaging from family dynamics. I attended holiday dinners but didn't participate in planning them. I congratulated Jessica on her wedding but declined to be in the bridal party when she offered, saying I was too busy with work to commit to the required time. I visited Richard during his recovery but stopped offering business advice or showing interest in the shop's operations. My mother noticed the change and asked me several times if everything was okay, but I couldn't explain how to mourn the death of hope, how to grieve for acceptance that was never really possible in the first place. Patricia seemed relieved by my withdrawal, interpreting it as finally accepting my proper place in the family hierarchy. Jessica was too busy with her new marriage and her job at an art gallery to notice much of anything beyond her own immediate concerns. Richard's second heart attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning in March. This time, there was no dramatic collapse at a social event, no rushed trip to the hospital, no weeks of uncertainty. My mother called me at work to tell me that he died peacefully in his sleep, that Patricia had found him when she tried to wake him for breakfast, that the paramedics said it was instantaneous, and he wouldn't have suffered. I felt strangely numb, neither devastated nor relieved, just empty in a way that surprised me with its completeness. I took 3 days off work to help with funeral arrangements, listening to Patricia and Jessica plan a service that celebrated Richard's life as a successful businessman, devoted husband, and loving father. During the eulogy, the pastor talked about Richard's generosity, his commitment to family, and his belief in the American dream. I sat in the third row, wearing my black dress and appropriate expression of grief, thinking about how funeral speeches never tell the whole truth about complicated people who leave complicated legacies behind. The week after the funeral, Patricia called a family meeting to discuss Richard's will and the future of the business. She'd already contacted Richard's lawyer, David Chin, and scheduled an appointment for the following Monday to handle what she assumed would be straightforward estate proceedings. Richard always said the business would stay in the family, she announced, pouring coffee in her pristine kitchen while Jessica nodded approvingly from the breakfast nook. Obviously, Jessica will inherit everything since she's his only child, but we wanted to discuss it as a family first. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair, shooting me a quick glance that I pretended not to see. I murmured something appropriately supportive about Jessica being capable of handling the responsibility, while internally calculating how long it would take for her to run 3 profitable businesses into the ground. Jessica had never shown the slightest interest in the automotive industry, had never worked a day in any of the shops, and thought profit margins referred to the space around pictures and art galleries. Walking into David Chen's law office that Monday morning, I felt like I was attending my own execution. The mahogany-paneled conference room smelled like leather and expensive cologne, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River and framed diplomas covering one wall. Patricia sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed in her black Chanel suit, while Jessica fidgeted with her designer handbag and checked her phone every few minutes. My mother perched on the edge of her chair, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. I chose a seat near the window, thinking I could stare at the river if the proceedings became too painful to watch. David Chin entered with a thick manila folder and the kind of grave expression that lawyers perfect for delivering life-changing news. He offered condolences, made small talk about Richard's business acumen, and then opened the folder with the deliberate precision of someone who knew exactly how much chaos he was about to unleash. "Before we begin," Mr. Chin said, adjusting his glasses and looking directly at me, "I should mention that Richard updated his will quite recently, just 6 months ago. He was very specific about his intentions and asked me to ensure that everyone understood his reasoning." Patricia nodded impatiently, clearly eager to get through the formalities so she could begin planning how to spend her inheritance. Jessica was still scrolling through her phone, occasionally showing my mother pictures from her recent vacation to the Bahamas. The irony of their complete inattention to what was about to happen struck me as almost cosmically perfect. Here they were, so confident in their assumptions that they couldn't even be bothered to listen carefully to the words that would change everything. Mr. Chin cleared his throat and began reading in the formal cadence that legal documents require, starting with the standard language about being of sound mind and disposing of worldly possessions. The first shock came when he read the section about the house. "I leave my primary residence at 1247 Elm Street, Wilmette, including all furnishings and personal property contained therein, to my stepdaughter Emma Rodriguez." Patricia's coffee cup clattered against its saucer, but Mr. Chun continued without pause. "This house represents the American dream that Emma understands and appreciates in ways that others have taken for granted. She has earned the right to call it home." Jessica looked up from her phone for the first time, confusion clouding her perfectly made-up face. My mother gasped audibly, and I felt the world tilt sideways as I tried to process what I'd just heard. The house was worth at least $800,000, sitting on prime real estate in one of Chicago's most desirable suburbs. It was the house where I'd never felt truly welcome, where I'd learned to make myself small and grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance I could find. But Mr. Chin wasn't finished. I leave my business interests, including Martinez Auto Services locations in Cicero, Schaumburg, and Oak Park, along with all associated equipment, inventory, accounts receivable, and goodwill, to my stepdaughter Emma Rodriguez. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore but hard to believe. Patricia made a choking sound, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. Jessica dropped her phone, the screen cracking against the conference table's polished surface. "There must be some mistake," Patricia whispered, but Mr. Chin shook his head gravely. Mr. Martinez was very clear about this decision. He left detailed notes explaining his reasoning, which I'm authorized to share if the family wishes. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together under the table, my mind reeling as I tried to understand how the man who'd spent 16 years telling me I'd never be good enough had just made me the sole owner of everything he'd built. The final revelation came when Mr. Chin opened a sealed envelope that Richard had specifically requested be read aloud after the primary bequests. His voice filled the stunned silence as he read Richard's own words. "To my family, I know this will come as a surprise, but Emma has proven herself to be the only person capable of carrying on what I've built. She has the intelligence, the work ethic, and the integrity that this business requires. More importantly, she has never expected anything from me, which makes her the only person I can trust with everything. To Emma specifically, I want you to know that every harsh word, every rejection, every time I told you that you weren't good enough was a test. You passed every single one. You are the daughter I never had the courage to claim publicly, but I've been prouder of you than I ever knew how to express. The business is yours because you've already proven you can run it better than anyone else in this family. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't deserve this. You've earned every penny." The room fell into complete silence except for the sound of Patricia crying, not tears of grief, but tears of rage and financial devastation. As I sit here now, 3 hours after learning that I'm suddenly wealthy beyond my wildest dreams, I can see my entire childhood differently. Every criticism was a lesson in resilience. Every rejection was training in self-reliance. Every time Richard made me feel small, he was actually preparing me to be strong enough to handle the enormous responsibility he was planning to give me. The man who taught me to expect nothing was secretly building a case for why I deserved everything. Patricia is already threatening to contest the will, Jessica is demanding that I do the right thing and share the inheritance, and my mother is torn between protecting me and maintaining family peace. But for the first time in my life, I don't need anyone's approval or permission to know my own worth. Richard may have been cruel in his methods, but he was right about one thing. I am the only person in this family who truly understands what it means to earn something through dedication and hard work. This inheritance isn't just money and property, it's validation from beyond the grave that I was worthy all along. The girl who learned to shrink herself to fit into spaces where she wasn't wanted has just inherited the power to create her own space, and I intend to use every lesson Richard taught me to build something even better than what he left behind.